There are women in the history of the Appalachian Mountains who existed in the space between what the community needed and what the community could officially provide. They were the ones you sent for when the doctor was 2 days away and the baby was coming wrong. They were the ones you trusted with the things you could not put into words at a church service or a county office. They were the midwives, the herb women, the healers, women who carried generations of mountain knowledge in their hands and in their heads, and who were granted, in exchange for that knowledge and that service, a degree of privacy, a degree of trust, and a degree of access to the most vulnerable moments in their community's life that no other figure possessed. They came into your home when the household was at its most exposed. They came when you could not manage alone. You gave them your trust the way you gave it to no one else, because the alternative was to have no one at all. Della Bowen of Watauga County, North Carolina, operated in that space for 31 years. She was 67 years old when a circuit judge named Harlan Mercer ordered an examination of her property in the autumn of 1884, not because anyone had accused her of a specific crime, but because a young minister's wife from Boone had begun asking, quietly and with increasing persistence, why the graves of infants on the Bowen property did not match any record of the births Della Bowen was known to have attended. The examination that followed answered that question. It also raised several others that the community of Watauga County was not prepared to answer publicly, and that the official record of 1884 addressed only in the most careful, oblique, and legally minimal terms available. What Della Bowen had been doing, what the examination found evidence of, across 3 decades of practice in the most isolated farming communities of the Blue Ridge, was deciding who was fit to live. Before we begin, drop your location in the comments and tell me what time it is there. This story begins in a place where trust was the only currency that mattered. By the end of it, you will understand exactly how that currency can be spent. Watauga County, North Carolina, sits at the edge of the Blue Ridge, a high-altitude county of steep ridges and narrow valleys where the winters are long and the growing season is short, and the communities that developed there in the 18th and 19th centuries had an extremely practical relationship with hardship. Life in the upper Blue Ridge in the mid-19th century was not merely difficult in the way that frontier life is generally described as difficult. It was difficult in the specific way that comes from altitude and isolation, and the particular agricultural poverty of land that is beautiful and rugged and hard to farm in a region where the nearest real town might be a day and a half of hard travel away, and the roads between communities were, for 3 or 4 months of the year, essentially impassable. Children died of things that a physician could have treated. Adults died of things that a physician could have treated. The physician was in Boone or in Taylorsville or not available at all, and the person who came when you needed someone was Della Bowen. She had begun her practice in the early 1850s, learning from the woman who had performed the same function in her part of Watauga County before her, an older woman whose name does not appear in any county record and who is referred to in the sparse documentation of this period only as the woman from meat camp. Della Bowen's first appearances in official records date to 1853, when she is listed as attending the birth of a child in the Stony Fork Valley. She is listed again in 1855, 1856, and at increasing frequency through the 1860s and into the 1870s as her reputation spread and the demand for her services grew with it. By the time she was in her 50s, she was attending births and illnesses across a range of perhaps 25 to 30 miles of mountain terrain, traveling on foot and by mule in conditions that would have prevented most people from traveling at all. She was, by every account that survived into the historical record, an effective practitioner within the limits of what mountain medicine could accomplish in that era. Children she attended lived at rates that compared favorably with the regional averages. Mothers she assisted through difficult deliveries survived at rates that were notable. The herbs and preparations she used were cataloged after her death by a botanist from the University of North Carolina, who interviewed elderly residents of Watauga County in the 1920s, and his notes describe a sophisticated practical pharmacopoeia that represented genuine accumulated knowledge rather than superstition. She was not a fraud. She was not ignorant. She knew what she was doing, and for 31 years the community she served trusted her with their lives and the lives of their children. The trust she had built operated at a level that the term professional reputation does not fully capture. In the communities of the Upper Blue Ridge in the mid-19th century, the woman who attended your births knew things about your household that no one else knew. She had been present at your most exposed moments. She had seen the inside of your home when the household was at its most vulnerable, exhausted, frightened, in pain, in the particular intimate chaos of a birth that was going wrong, or a sick child, or a dying parent. She had been trusted with information that families would share with no minister, no neighbor, no county official. And in exchange for that trust, she was extended a corresponding degree of privacy in her own practice. You did not question the healer. You did not audit her. You called her when you needed her, and you trusted that what she did was what she said she was doing, because the alternative, the suspicion that it might not be, was a thought that the community was not able to fully entertain. She was the person you needed her to be. That was the arrangement. It held for 31 years, which is what made the examination of 1884 so disturbing. The young woman who started asking questions was named Clara Aldridge. She was 26 years old, married to a Methodist minister serving the Boone Circuit, and she had a particular combination of qualities that made her simultaneously the person most likely to notice what she noticed and the person most likely to be dismissed when she said it out loud. She was educated. She had attended a female seminary in Virginia before her marriage, and she was attentive to detail in the way that educated women of her period often were, having been trained in the careful maintenance of household and family records. She had recently lost a child at birth, and in the particular state of grief and attention that follows such a loss she had begun, almost without realizing it, to pay close attention to the births and deaths of infants in the communities where her husband held services. She had noticed that in 3 specific communities, the Stony Fork Valley, the Upper Watauga River settlements, and the communities around Meat Camp, infant mortality in the households, attended by Della Bowen, showed a pattern that Clara Aldridge could not explain. She had noticed it the way a careful person notices things that are not being presented for their notice, obliquely, through the accumulated weight of small discrepancies, through the gradual realization that what she had initially assumed were unrelated facts were in fact a pattern with a shape. She did not rush to a conclusion. She spent 6 weeks checking and rechecking what she had observed before she said a word to anyone. She was 26 years old, and she was the wife of a circuit minister in a county where Della Bowen was a respected figure who had been practicing for 30 years, and she understood exactly what it would mean to accuse such a woman on the basis of what amounted, in the absence of a formal investigation, to a statistical observation about household demographics and infant death rates. She was careful, she was methodical, and she was right. Certain families lost infants at rates consistent with the regional average. Other families, and she had been careful enough to note which ones, lost infants at rates that were substantially above it. The families with the higher rates shared certain characteristics. They were the poorest households, the most isolated, the ones with the most children already, the ones where a new infant represented a burden that the family was visibly struggling to carry. She brought this to her husband, who brought it to Reverend Thomas Halford in Boone, who brought it with considerable reluctance and several caveats about the danger of accusing a respected community figure on the basis of statistical observation alone, to Judge Harlan Mercer. Mercer was a careful man. He ordered an inquiry before an examination, 2 months of quiet record checking, comparing Della Bowen's attendance records against the birth and death records in the county and church registers. The results of that inquiry are preserved in the Watauga County Court records in Boone. Of the 312 births Della Bowen was documented as having attended between 1853 and 1884, 47 resulted in the death of the infant within 72 hours of birth. This was a number consistent with the period's overall infant mortality rates, and not, on its face, alarming. What the inquiry found alarming was the distribution of that number. Of the 47 infant deaths following her attendance, 41, nearly 90%, occurred in households that met the poverty and overcrowding criteria that Clara Aldridge had identified. The remaining 6 were distributed across all other household types. The statistical probability of that distribution occurring by chance was, in the opinion of the mathematics instructor at Appalachian Normal School in Boone, who was quietly consulted, effectively 0. Judge Mercer ordered the examination of the Bowen property in October 1884. Della Bowen was at home when the sheriff and his deputies arrived. She was 67 years old, and she was described by the deputy who filed the primary report as looking her age in the way that mountain women often did, not frail, not diminished, but bearing the specific physical weight of decades of hard work and hard weather in a way that was unmistakable. Her hair was white and pulled back severely. Her hands were described as small and very precise in their movements, the hands of someone who had spent a lifetime in close, careful work. She received the sheriff with complete composure. She did not appear surprised. She told him he was welcome to look at whatever he came to look at. She then sat down in her kitchen chair and did not move for the duration of the examination. Behind her property, up the hill in the tree line to the north, there were graves. The county had known about the graves in a general sense. It was understood in the community that Della Bowen had buried children on her property over the years, infants who had died in her care in circumstances that made transport to the family's home burial ground impractical. This was not unusual in the context of mountain midwifery. Children died. Sometimes they died far from home. Burials happened where they happened. The graves on the Bowen property were known. What was not known was how many there were. The examination found 31 graves. The county record showed documented birth attendances that could account for, at most, 11 of them. The other 20 had no corresponding official record of any birth or death. In the language of the examining physician, Dr. Silas Rowe from Boone, they represented deaths that had not been reported to any authority, that had not appeared in any church register, and that had apparently not been disclosed to the families of the infants involved. Dr. Rowe's examination of the physical evidence, conducted over 3 days in October 1884 with the assistance of a colleague from Asheville, produced findings that his official report described in the careful euphemism required by the audience that report was addressed to. He was a careful physician and a careful writer, and he understood that the document he was producing would be read by the families of the communities in question, communities that were still active, still attending the same churches, still living on the same ridge roads, and that the level of detail his findings technically warranted was not the level of detail those families needed to carry for the rest of their lives. He made a choice. He wrote what the law required, and he stopped there. His private notes, donated to the North Carolina State Archives in Raleigh by his granddaughter in 1978, described his findings with less euphemism. He wrote, "The evidence is consistent with deliberate and repeated action at or shortly after birth. The distribution across the chronology of the graves is not consistent with natural causes operating at the rate observed. I believe this woman made decisions that were not hers to make, and I believe she made them according to criteria that she had established for herself and that no one had examined or contested for 30 years. Della Bowen gave a single statement to the sheriff on the afternoon of October 17, 1884. It was recorded by Mercer's clerk and entered into the court record. It was the only statement she ever made on the subject, and she made it in the flat, steady voice of a woman who had decided, long before anyone came to ask, exactly what she was willing to say and what she was not. She said that in 31 years of practice, she had attended the births of children who could not survive and children whose survival would destroy the household that was expected to sustain them. She said that the mountains did not have enough for everyone, and that the people who called her when they could not manage alone already knew this better than any judge or physician in Boone. She said that she had never acted without what she believed was cause, and that she had lived with what she had done without confusion about whether it was right. She did not use the word mercy. She did not use the word murder. She used neither word, and she did not elaborate, and she did not answer any subsequent question. What the statement reveals, in the negative space of what it does not say, is something that the official record could not process, and that the communities she had served could not fully confront. She was not confessing, she was explaining. There is a difference, and the difference is the most disturbing thing about Della Bowen. She had a framework. She had thought about what she was doing. She had criteria and standards and a sustained conviction over 31 years that what she was doing was the correct response to the conditions she observed. She was not a woman who had committed violence in moments of weakness or panic. She was a woman who had constructed an entire philosophy of care that included, as one of its components, decisions that the law and the community she served had not authorized her to make, and the community had trusted her with the access that made those decisions possible, and the community had accepted her fees and her expertise and the children she delivered successfully for 31 years, without asking what the full ledger of her practice looked like. That is the part that the official record was most careful to minimize, not Della Bowen's actions, but the mechanism that made them possible. A structure of trust and privacy extended to a single woman, unchecked for 3 decades, in a region where no alternative structure existed. She operated in that space. She operated in it for 31 years. And the first person to look at the full shape of what she had done was a 26-year-old minister's wife from Boone who sat down and counted. She was charged with unlawful disposal of human remains on a single count, for reasons that the surviving court record does not fully explain, the same pattern of charge reduction that appears in other Appalachian cases of this period, where the full weight of the evidence was considered too disruptive to the community to pursue in its entirety. The charge was subsequently reduced further on a procedural motion that the circuit court approved without recorded comment. She was sentenced to 18 months in the county jail, served 14, and was released in 1886. She returned to her property. She did not resume her practice. She died in 1891 at the age of 74. She is buried in the churchyard at Stony Fork in a grave that has a stone and is still standing, surrounded by the graves of people she delivered into the world. Think about the geometry of that churchyard for a moment. Della Bowen's stone is there, and around it are the graves of women and men who called her when they could not manage alone, who trusted her with their lives and the lives of their children, who may or may not have known, in the specific, unspoken way, that isolated communities know things without ever making them fully explicit, that her practice included decisions that had not been discussed openly. The communities of the Stony Fork Valley and the upper Watauga River settlements did not produce a single public accusation against Della Bowen in 31 years. Clara Aldridge, who discovered what she discovered, was not from those communities. She had come from outside them, from Boone, with the particular clarity of vision that sometimes belongs to someone who is seeing a familiar pattern for the first time, rather than the 1,000th. The people inside the communities, the ones who had called Della Bowen for 3 decades, the ones who had handed their newborns to her, did not come forward. Not one of them. What that silence means is something the record does not tell us. Whether it was ignorance or complicity, or the particular combination of dependence and dread that makes a community unable to name what it has been living alongside. This is not knowable from the court record or the church record or any document that survived. It is only knowable from the silence itself, and from the fact that Della Bowen's grave is in that churchyard, with a stone, surrounded by the people she served, and no one among the living who knew her ever put their name to a complaint. The 31 graves on her property were visited one final time by a county representative in 1885, after the trial was complete, and then left undisturbed. A fence was erected around them. The property was acquired by the county after Della Bowen's death and has been maintained without development since. No public marker identifies the history of the site. In 1994, a local historian who was compiling a record of historical burials in Watauga County visited the property and found all 31 graves still present and identifiable. He noted the visit in his research files. He did not include the site in the published record. He explained this decision in a note attached to his files that was found after his death by writing, "Some things the living have to decide whether to carry. I have decided not to carry this one publicly. The families are still here. The names would still land." Here is the question that Della Bowen leaves behind, and it may be the hardest one in this entire collection of dark histories. She believed she was making a mercy, She believed, based on 30 years of watching what poverty and isolation and too many mouths did to mountain families, that she understood which lives the mountain could sustain and which it could not. She made her decisions with what she understood to be precision and care, and this is the word that stops the breath, compassion. She did not see herself as a killer. She saw herself as the person who absorbed the unbearable decision so that the families she served did not have to make it themselves. Was she a monster? Or was she the product of a system, medical, economic, social, that placed her in a position where someone was going to make those decisions, and she simply decided it would be her rather than leaving it to chance? And if the second answer has any truth in it at all, then what do we do with that truth? Where does the responsibility for Della Bowen's 31 graves actually begin? Drop your answer in the comments. This one does not have an easy side. If these buried histories are the reason you found this channel, and you want to go deeper into the cases that the record tried to minimize and the community tried to forget, subscribe and ring the bell. There is more. There is always more. The mountains do not forget. They just learn to look like they have.